Classical Conditioning Module Overview. This module will cover the basic processes of learning in animals, including innate behavior, classical conditioning, and their application to dog training. Learning objectives. By the end of this module, students will 1. Categorize behavior based on components of classical conditioning, US, CS, UR, and ZR. 2. Contrast generalization and discrimination in classical conditioning. 3. Describe extinction of classically conditioned behavior. And 4. Develop a plan for extinction of a classically conditioned response. In this module, you will be required to read B&B Chapter 7, 8, and 9. You will be required to watch the video attached to the comment section below, and you will complete reading quiz number 3. Simple learning and habituation. Learning is the process of change that occurs as a result of an individual's experience. Learning occurs not only in educational settings, but in everyday life. Individuals experience countless things each day, and each of these things may result in learning. For example, a playful puppy that runs into a wall may learn to be more careful and changes behavior accordingly. The simplest type of learning is called habituation. Habituation is a decrease in the strength of a response after repeated presentation of a stimulus. Habituation occurs often, such as when you learn to ignore certain sounds in your environment because they are meaningless. Sounds such as buzzing of electronic equipment, for example, are often ignored because they occur frequently and are of no importance. Imagine your friend lives near a rifle/shooting range. When you visit, you are frequently startled by the sound of the gunshots. Your friend, however, seems oblivious. Your friend has habituation to the startling noise from repeated exposure. Attached is the video about habituation. Unlearned behaviors. Reflexes. A reflex is an action that is performed as a response to a stimulus without conscious thought. For example, when a doctor tests your knee's reflex, he uses a small hammer to hit a certain area of the knee. Your legs reflexively move in response. Other examples of reflexes are coughing, sneezing, and startling. There are multiple reflexes occurring in the human body constantly, from your eyes adjusting to incoming light to yawning. Here is a list of different reflexes in humans. List of reflexes. Dogs also engage in reflexive behaviors such as yawning, sneezing, and startling. Dogs also have some unique reflexes. For example, when scratched in a certain area, many dogs exhibit the leg kick reflex. Dogs reflexively salivate in response to food, as do humans, and the orienting reflex is a great photo op for dog lovers. Attached to the comments is the leg kick reflex video. Classical conditioning. Pavlov's dogs. Remember Pavlov and his dogs? Pavlov discovered serendipitously that his research subjects, dogs, began to salivate to the presence of the lab assistants that fed the dogs. Salivation is a reflexive response to food, but not to a lab assistant. How did this happen? Pavlov theorized that the repeated presentation of the lab assistant followed by food created an association such as the dogs began responding to the lab assistants before food was even present. Pavlov demonstrated the phenomena using other stimuli like whistles and bells. This is called classical conditioning. Before conditioning or learning occurs, food presentation leads to salivation in dogs. This means that food is an unconditioned stimulus, or US. No learning must take place in order for the food to elicit salivation. This is a reflexive response that occurs innately. This reflex evolved as a survival mechanism. Saliva is required to digest food. Before conditioning, the whistle is meaningless to the dog. The whistle is a neutral stimulus, or NS. During conditioning, the whistle is presented, followed by food. The dog salivates in response to the food. Salivation is the unconditioned response, or UR. This pairing is repeated several times. Eventually, once learned, or after conditioning, the whistle itself leads to the response of salivation. The whistle is now a conditioned stimulus, or CS. There's a video attached about classical conditioning. Classical conditioning application. What does classical conditioning have to do with dog training? Many things a dog learns are simply associations between two things. Fear responses are often learned within a stimulus, such as a door is associated with pain, fear, or startle. This association leads to fearful behaviors like fear of doorways. Alternatively, classical conditioning can be used to create positive associations when working with a puppy. It is very important to socialize them. Socialization does not mean merely exposing the puppy to a lot of different things. It means creating a positive or good association with those things. We use classical conditioning to create our conditioned reinforcer. A clicker for yes is an initially neutral or meaningless stimulus. It is only once it has been repeated, followed by food and other rewards, that these stimuli become meaningful to the dog. Another example is leash reactivity. It is normal for the dog to want to interact with other dogs when on walks. They may even bark at the other dogs. Most owners are concerned by this behavior and try to discourage it by tightening up on the leash and reprimanding the dog, or worse, punishing the dog using shock or jerk on the leash. Over time, the dog develops an association. The presence of other dog predicts uncomfortable tightening of the leash, verbal reprimands, and even pain or startle. After conditioning, these dogs will react to other dogs when on leash in what often looks very aggressive. This is leash reactivity or leash frustration. If given the opportunity, these dogs often do just fine socializing with the other dogs when off leash. For your journal entry, brainstorm other ways that classical conditioning may affect a dog's behavior. Importance of timing in classical conditioning. The relationship in time between the presentation of the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus is important. Short delay conditioning will lead to strong, rapid associations. Short delay conditioning is when the NS is presented slightly before the US. In Pavlov's example, the tone was presented first, followed quickly by food. When intentionally creating associations, this is the order that will create a strong association quickly. Unfortunately, this is often the case when unwanted associations are accidentally created. Taste aversion learning. Classical conditioning explains a ubiquitous incident in lives of humans, taste aversion. Nearly all of us have an experience in which we ate something that we associated with sickness or pain that we can no longer eat. This type of conditioning often occurs after only one trial. The aversion is strong even if the food itself wasn't the cause of sickness, which it often isn't. Most college students who engage in drinking have had experience in taste aversion, where after drinking too much of a favorite alcohol and becoming sick afterward, the sight, smell, or even thought of that alcohol elicits similar feelings of nausea. This is taste aversion. Let's review how this might happen in classical conditioning terms. First, the NS is the taste sight, smell of the food or drink. This is followed by sickness for any reason, maybe you have the flu. After one pairing, it is possible that you develop a negative association to that food or drink. In the basic laboratory, rats are given apple juice to drink, which they naturally enjoy. 15 minutes later, researchers inject the rat with poison. The poison causes the rats to vomit. Even though the apple juice wasn't the cause of the illness, the rats will no longer drink apple juice after this experience. What are the CS, US, and UR in this example? Taste aversion learning fun fact. Vampire bats do not learn conditioned taste aversion. Why? Activity. Please complete an email to instructor. How would you reverse a taste aversion to a food? For example, your friend had the flu at a young age and became ill after eating oatmeal. This was 10 years ago, but your friend still cannot eat or even smell oatmeal without becoming nauseous. What would you tell your friend to do? 1. What is the CS? 2. The US? 3. The CR/UR? 4. Can you reverse this association and how? Reversing classical conditioning. In the previous example, as is the case with most associations, the response to oatmeal will not go away with only the passage of time. The person may go 10 years without ever smelling or eating oatmeal again, but still have the same response when they do. In order to reverse associations created by classical conditioning, we present the CS without the US following. So the Pavlov's dogs, if we repeatedly present the bell with no food following, the association between the bell and the food will become weak, and the dog will no longer salivate to the bell. The process isn't quite as simple with taste aversion, since this association is such a strong one. But the same is true. If we can present the oatmeal without nausea or sickness following it, then the association with it will eventually reverse and your friend will no longer feel it at the sight. smell, or taste of oatmeal. Generalization. Remember little Albert? He was given a white rat, followed by a loud, startling noise. After several pairings, little Albert began to respond fearfully to the presence of all white rat, even without the startling sound. Little Albert responded similarly to similar stimuli, such as a white rabbit and even a fur coat. Generalization is the process by which stimuli that are similar to the original conditioned stimulus produce a similar response. The more similar a stimulus is to the original, the greater the likelihood that it will produce the conditioned response. There are several examples of this in dog training. Dogs have experienced pain at the cause of a door squishing their paw generalized the fear/avoidance response to all doorways, even though many look quite different than the original door that led to the pain. Also, dogs can generalize to other people's voices and prompts, even though they undoubtedly differ from the voice and/or prompt that was used to teach them originally. Discrimination. Discrimination is the opposite of generalization. This is when an animal learns to respond to one stimulus but not another, even if the stimuli are similar. For example, in group training classes, dogs are able to discriminate between all of the different clickers sounding around them. How do they do this? They learn the subtle differences in sound and which of these sounds is followed by food. The other click sounds are not, so they easily habituate to them over time. We will discuss generalization and discrimination more when we talk about operant conditioning.